Dear participants, the new global scenario team from ScMI wants to officially welcome you to the second of our 3 online sessions to present the scenario report. Who is the mysterious ScMI, Scenario Management International? We are a small team of scenario and future experts, as you can see, extremely good-looking people, and happy to hear from you and get into a discussion. So you find our contact details below. Alexander Fink is our CEO and also head of our new global scenario team. And my colleagues Jonas, Sarah, Jens-Peter, and me, Hannah, were also highly involved in the scenario creation process. And we were supported by the rest of our great team. But mainly, it was the valuable input of a big global team, which came together in 4 online sessions between June and September 21. We want to thank every single person who put effort and expertise in the scenario process. Without this global and highly motivated team, the creation of the new global scenarios would not have been possible. Some of the international experts sent us personal statements also, so many thanks once again. You find those personal statements in the report, and you can download the report on our website. We will give you the link in the chat, and you will see it later on in our presentation also. So thanks to everybody who participated. The new global scenarios, based on our post-COVID scenario study, we conducted in a first open online process in 2020. As the pandemic changed many apparent certainties on a global level, we decided to start a deep dive regarding the new global, considering world economy, power shift, and global architecture in 2035 and beyond. We set up the open online scenario creation, supported by our proven partners you see in the slide here. When we started the process of the new global scenario creation in June 21, the global political situation was quite different to today. It was more stable and looking completely different. But today's situation shows insistently how important future studies regarding global architecture really are. We didn't know about Ukraine war 1 year ago, but we will still find the current developments within the scenarios. So you might be excited to see the scenarios if you don't know them by now, and the results of the evaluation. So I think let's get started. Alex, would you like to take over and guide us through the process?
Yeah, Hannah, thanks a lot, and also welcome from my side. And as Hannah mentioned, the idea is to start with a little view in the process of scenario development and then to take a look on the results. So we started this process with, we call it a radar screen or a system image that explains or that includes the main areas that we took into consideration. And for these areas, we identified influence factors. These influence factors always include different aspects. So that was a long list of different factors that we took into consideration. Here you see this list of 50 influence factors. And because we couldn't work out scenarios with so many factors, we analyzed the interconnections between these factors, and at the end, we reduced it to a list of 23 so-called key factors. You could understand them as being our questions to the future, because these factors will be part of the scenarios. And for each of these key factors, we took a closer look into the future. And we asked ourselves, how could these factors develop up to 2035 and beyond? And we did that by using these little portfolios, which give us the possibility to include not just 1, but 2 dimensions into our discussions. And at the end of this second step, we had a result like this, which included for every key factor 4, sometimes 5 possible developments. So you could take a look on these interim result also like that. So we had a lot of building blocks, and you could see that the next step is the combination of these building blocks into scenarios. And this is done by two main criteria and supported by a scenario software. And the first criteria is that the building blocks within one scenario should be consistent. It should be a plausible future. And the second criteria is that the different scenarios should, or that the scenarios should describe very different futures. And this led to, at the end, 8 different scenarios, which are visualized, as you can see it here, based on statistics in this way. And then we reworked it into our real map of the future. And this is what you also see in the report, the visualization of the 8 different scenarios. And I will come back to that in a few seconds. When we had these scenarios and the map of the future, we continued the process with the scenario assessment. And this is again a process where many of you have been participating, so that we will take a look on the map of the future first, then on the scenarios, and then on the results of the scenario assessment. Let us just roughly look on how we went through the process. We had these 4 online workshops that Hannah mentioned. They ended in September, and we had the online scenario assessment starting in October, ending mid of February. So I have to mention that all of the results that we will see have been worked out before the war in Ukraine started. Nevertheless, Hannah mentioned it, and it could be part of our discussions. There are many aspects that could help us to understand what might happen even after these events. Let's take a look on the map of the future first, with looking on this quotation of Gary Hamel, who once said that we can't use an old map to see a new land. So we need a new map, and this map of the new global scenarios looks like this. And of course, the first question is, what is west and east, and what is north and south in this picture? And what we see here is that the 3 scenarios on the left side include a development where the West continues to lead the global development, while on the right side, the scenarios 4 to 6 are scenarios with a very strong shift of power to Asia. And this is the first axis in our map of the future. And we can, of course, take a look on the second one. And that separates the upper from the lower scenarios. And we see that the 3 scenarios in the upper part include multilateral cooperation, even community orientation, higher ethical standards of companies, circular economies, different of these kind of developments, while the scenarios with the darker frame, 6, 7, and 8, that are scenarios that include division and conflicts. And the 2 scenarios in between, 1 and 5, that are scenarios with very unipolar developments. Once more from the Western side, once more from the Chinese side. So putting these 2 axes together leads to this cross, but we also see there are 4 scenarios a little bit in between. And it's interesting to take a closer look even on these scenarios. And we see that scenarios 2 and 8 are scenarios with very strong non-state actors. Once in a more positive way with very much innovation, that is scenario 2, and once with a more negative way with a lot of fragmentation in the world, that is scenario 8. And if you look on the right side, you see is a world where political alliances play a very significant role. And we see that in the more negative way in scenario 6 with 2 blocks. And we have a more positive way where you have interaction in regional pillars in scenario 4. There are some more aspects that could be seen if you dig a little bit deeper into this map. For example, you see different kinds of globalization, ranging from multipolar globalism in the scenarios 2 and 3 up to a weakened globalization at all in scenarios 6 and 7. You could take a look on the global economy and wealth, where you see that in scenarios 3 and 4, the world is moving together while it's drifting apart in 7 and 8. And cultural values also play an important role. We see a more individualistic, low trust world in the scenarios 1 and 8, while 4 and 5 have a far more Eastern orientation. And the last perspective here is those which covers the global economy as well as the system rivalry. And you see that the Western defended dominance is included in this, not only in 1, but also in 2. And the China-driven reordering of the world could be seen in the scenarios 5 and 6. So that is our map of the future. And if you ask yourself, what are the single scenarios about? We could make a short run through these scenarios. And starting with scenario 1, which is named US rules. And you see on the right side the little map. This is the extreme scenario on the western side of the map. And it is a world where the West continues to lead, where we have a Western defended dominance. At the end, you could say that appears if the US continues or resumes to actively fulfill their leading role in the world. So they are the sole and ultimately defining superpower. But we also see more or less unchanged consumption patterns here. And we see a technological leadership of the West. So that is one scenario, but 1 out of 8. So if we go to the second one, we named it Silicon World. It's not Silicon Valley, it's Silicon World. And we see an emergence of new global communities. So this is not unipolar, this is more multilateral, what we see here. And it appears if the global tech companies, wherever they come from, have a high level of social responsibility, and at the end, they enjoy far greater trust than the traditional political players. So we see a replacement of national state ideas by global and by local identities. We see a strong influence of companies, of urban areas, of civil societies in this scenario. As you see, the digital companies act based on high ethical standards, and in general, this is a highly innovative scenario. If we go one step further, we are again in an extreme scenario, and you could say this is the extreme cooperative scenario. We named it global awareness. And you see here, this is bound to very powerful global institutions. We see the strengthening of the global South and in general, an overall decline in global inequality. And this is also the scenario with the most consequent climate policies here. So this is why the subtitle is also named Sustainable Transformation Through Cooperation. We go one scenario on to scenario 4. It is named Olympic rings, and you might ask yourself, why is it named this way? The reason is why this is a scenario where we have different geo-regional pillars who dominate in their area, in their ecosystem. But these ecosystems, the spheres of influence, they cooperate and they compete. So it's classically a co-opetition scenario. And Europe's role here is a more independent one with a clearer distance to the US and to China. And but it's generally a multilateral world where we have different technology concepts, different political concepts which exist parallel to each other. We go to scenario 5. The next extreme one now on the right side, and it is named China rules, because this is a world where China opens up and it develops into the new superpower. And in Asia itself, it becomes more a hegemon in this scenario. And this has something to do with that we have less multilateral cooperation. Here we have more dominance of national interests and identities. So we have different concepts, but under this unipolar world, which we see here, and we have economic dynamism despite of significant restrictions in world trade. So this is scenario 5. We go to scenario 6. It is like scenario 4, a scenario with a stronger role of alliances. But now we see new value blocks, and the subtitle is the Cold War is back. We see the emergence of these blocks, roughly spoken, Western democracies versus autocracies. And if we look to Asia, for example, we have a hegemonic policy which increasingly leads to resistance in Asia, but we also have critical developments in more Western areas. And what we also see in this scenario is that the company structures develop according to political and system differences, and also do technology concepts. And this is the first scenario out of the scenarios that we see here with stronger global migration movements. We go to scenario 7. It is the opposite of 3, so to say. We named it conflictual uncertainties. And this is a scenario where hardly any global cooperation is possible, and states and groups face each other in various kinds of conflicts. Might it be small ones or larger ones? So we have instability, we have different conflicts, we have even stronger global migration. We have, in general, Western values are on the retreat. And we have a situation with a world of financial uncertainty because today's world financial system is eroding here. And at the end, we have a smaller elite that drives here something like a global plutocracy. And scenario 8, the last one, that is a scenario which has similarities to 7, but also clear differences. And it belongs again to this group of the relevant non-state actors scenarios. It is named neo-fragmentation because this is a scenario where people lose trust into politics and into public authorities. So we see weak nation states and social cohesion eroding. And various competing non-state actors gain importance here. And so everything is getting more smaller, more fragmented. And in addition to that, we see a digital divide in all countries and societies. And there are no clear borders regarding values. So we see that Western values are important in the authoritarian areas and the other way around. And it is also a scenario where we face a loss of control over monetary system. So we have a lot of alternative private payment devices here. So this is a short run through the scenarios. If you look into the documentation, you will see that there are a few more concrete statements regarding some of the regional actors and countries. But of course, I have to mention not for all. So we stayed on a global level here when describing the scenarios. The last part of the presentation is not about the scenarios itself, but about the assessment, because up to this point, we described scenarios which had the same weight. They are just thinking tools. And now we go one step further, and we did it with the scenario assessment, and we asked ourselves, where do we stand today and what might come in the future? And I would like to show you 9 conclusions from this scenario assessment. And the first one is that a global dialogue is possible. It sounds simple, but this is something which we learned from this process, besides all the many content aspects that we learned by interacting with people from more than 60 countries. And what you see here is a map showing the countries from which we got responses in the scenario assessment process. And on the left side, you see the 5 continents plus Germany. Sorry for that. So you see that we had 28% people answering from Germany. So we decided for this little analysis, we are the 6th continent, but only for this analysis. And what you see here in is that for some of the continents, we had even sub-regions that we could analyze because we had more than 10 participants in these areas. In addition to the regions, we also analyzed the age and the profession. But I have to tell you that we saw more differences regarding the country than the age of the profession. So there are only a few relevant aspects where it was interesting to look on the age and on the profession, and one of them will be shown later. Those of you who participated might remember this online questionnaire, and within the questionnaire, we asked 3 questions. The first was about the current situation. Where do we stand today? And as I mentioned, today was between October last year and mid of February this year. The second question was, where do we expect the world in the year 2035 and beyond? And if you compare these 2 perspectives, you get what we call the expected change. And the last question was about what would be good in the future, what would be a preferred one. And you could also compare the preferred future to the current situation. Then you get something like the preferred change. If we look on the current situation, the first outcome is that the present lacks cooperation. So what you see here are the 10 questions that we asked and the tendency that we got from your answers regarding these 10 questions. And you see, the more it moves to the left or to the right side, the clearer the tendency is. And so we see the situation that egoism, slow down climate policy is relatively clear. The disconnection of the global south is clear, and also the dominance of national interests over multilateral cooperation. So that is roughly spoken the situation today. And if you interconnect that to our scenarios, you see here, and this is the degree of coverage of these scenarios compared to the current situation. You see that scenario 6, the new value blocks, that is the one which is the highest nearness to the current situation, followed by neo-fragmentation. So you see the 3 scenarios in the upper area are those with the lowest nearness to the current situation. So this is more or less a skeptical view on our current world. But let us look on what we expect in the future. And here, one clear tendency is that the power shift to Asia is in full swing. So if we look on the same kind of diagram, but now not with the current situation, but with the expected future, we see that the question 2 in row 2, that is the one with the clearest statement that we expect for the future a shift of power to Asia. And what we also see is that for most of the questions, there's not a clear answer. So the answer is somewhere in between the 2 extremes. We could take a look on the expected change, which means the difference between the current situation and the expected future. And we see some of the yellow arrows, and you also see the yellow arrow here regarding the shift to Asia. So we expect that this is something which continues. As we did it with the current situation, we could take a look on what that means to the scenarios. And first of all, we see that the numbers here are relatively similar, which means that we are in an uncertain world. We see that the highest number is still with scenario 6, the new value blocks, but we also see something positive, because scenarios 2, 3, and 4, the ones in the upper part of our map, they have clearly higher numbers when we talk about the expected future compared to the current situation. An important question for us was, is the world seen similar around the world, at least around the experts that we asked? And I have to mention, this is not a representative assessment. It's a question that we asked for a little bit more than 200 experts. Nevertheless, we put the results, which you know from this map of the future here in the center, we put it in a simple ranking. Like you see it here, scenario 6 has the highest nearness to the expected future, and scenario 1, US rules, has the lowest one. This is why it's rank 8. And what we could do is, we could do the same kind of analysis for our 5 continents plus Germany. And we could also take a look on the sub-regions. And we could do that for some specific perspective. So putting Northern Africa and Middle East together and taking a look on Near and Middle East, or on the West and the Global South. And this looks a little bit crazy, I know, but it is far more interesting to use this for some slides. And the first slide is shown here. If you simply compare the 2 extremes, the China rules scenario with the US rules scenario. And what we see is, wherever we ask in the world, nobody expects US rules more than China rules. So this shift to Asia is something which we see wherever we look. It might be interesting to see that the highest difference could be seen in Western Europe and in the Americas, while the lowest difference is seen in China. So that is also an interesting point. Let us also look on alliances. And as we've seen in this slide, our scenario 6, the one with the system rivalry between, let me say, the West and China. That is the scenario with the highest value for the current situation and for the expected future. But our question is that a global outcome? And if we take a look on the same kind of analysis and we compare the scenario 6, which is the one with the system rivalry, with the Olympic rings, which is the scenario with the multipolarity, then we see that new value blocks with the system rivalry clearly dominates the view in Europe and in America and in Australia Pacific. And if you look on Asia and Africa, this scenario is not that clearly expected anymore. And in most of these areas, in China, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, there the multipolarity scenario, the Olympic rings, is more expected than the system rivalry one. So it is possible, and you could also see it on the right side with these last two columns. In the West, we are very much focusing on system rivalry. If we go to China, if we go to the global South, it's much more about multipolarity. That, to our mind, is a highly interesting outcome out of this assessment. Let us also look on the transformation and on the preferred future. And because that was the third question that we asked. And here we see that the preferences are now in the upper part, while the current situation is in the lower part. And that is exactly what we name the global transformation. So if we take the same kind of analysis, but now we visualize the current situation, we see that the three preferred scenarios, number 2, number 3, and number 4, are on the lowest ranks in nearly all areas in the world, except sub-Saharan Africa. And if we look on the preferred future, then it's directly the opposite. And this is exactly what we could name the global transformation, what we had in mind. And that is a topic all over the world. And if we take a look on all of the three perspectives, we see the skeptical view on the present, we see the preferences on the right, and we see the expected future somewhere in between. And the interesting point is that every scenario is relevant in two perspectives, but not in three. But that is also an outcome that we recognized a little bit later in the analysis. Let us look on shortly on some more additional aspects. We see if we look on the expected future, and if we compare the very positive scenario 3 with the very negative scenario 7, we see a very positive view of the future in Asia and in Africa and in Latin America. So in China and in the global South. In China, extremely, scenario 3 is those with the highest expectation, while conflictual uncertainties, number 7, is the one with the lowest. And we have regions where it's absolutely different. If you look on the US, if you look on Eastern Europe, if you look on Germany, here we have much more critical, much more skeptical view on the future. We could also take a look on the preferences for the single questions. And here we have a much more clearer view. Remember, the expectation was not that clear. The preference is really clear. And this is again the global transformation put on the different questions. And what we also see is the two questions with the highest ranking regarding the preferred future. That is the need for global climate strategies and for a higher level of multilateral cooperation. And the interesting point is these 2 points are highly bound in our scenarios 2, 3, and 4. So that is why we could directly see the interconnection between climate strategies and cooperation. Let us, at the end, take a look on the values. And here we started the analysis with the term Western values. And I know, and we discussed that, these are universal values. So, but because we had it in the questionnaire like this, we leave it here. We could, of course, discuss that critically, that it's named Western values here. But what we see is that the preference and the preferred change is always one where these universal values have a higher preference and a higher global appeal. And it was interesting for us to take a look on these points for the different regions. You see it here on the left, but also for the ages and for the profession. And the interesting point is here you see in the red dots the current situation, and in the green dots the preferred. And what we see here is that wherever we look, we have a wish of a higher role of universal values. And the interesting point is that we see it very clearly among the young people, much more clearer. So that was when we look on these additional aspects in the assessment, we saw that even younger people have this clear wish for universal values. And maybe that is something to discuss. We see that the evaluations in Asia include a lower level of preference regarding a global appeal of these universal values. Maybe something to discuss. My last point is we could take a look on the non-state actors, because from our point of view, this could be unknown game changer. And if you look on this slide here, you see our 2 scenarios, including the stronger role of the non-state actors. And what we see is there's nearly no region where these scenarios are not among the top 2, and nowhere it's not among the top 3. And if you look especially on Asia and Africa, excluding China, then we have the Silicon World scenario being the one which is expected to be the future. And there are some other areas, again, the US, again, Eastern Europe, where we see the strong role of non-state actors, but not in the positive way like scenario 2, much more in the negative way as described in the neo-fragmentation. Yeah, so that is the overview, and that is the point where I hand over to Hannah to guide us through a little discussion of these results.
Wow, Alex, that was Alex will guide you through in less than 10 minutes.
Yep, I will try to do so. With looking together with you on 6 things which could be done. And the first point is that scenarios are a communication tool. And therefore, they should be discussed. They should even be controversially discussed. And I have to say that we all, the authors, we are available for presentations, for discussions in different events. I have to mention that here. Secondly, we have seen the assessment made by the global experts, and we discussed whether we need to do it with the larger group. But what we could also think about, if there are audiences who want to build their own assessment, this is also something which could be done. Making your own assessment and comparing it to the global perspective and working with that. Point 3 is that scenarios could be used, the new global scenarios could be used as a basis for specific scenarios. So as we said, the different elements of the scenarios are available. You could take a look on our homepage and see the factors or the projections. So the building blocks are available. And there's also the possibility to when you create your own scenarios, to focus on the specific issues of your industry, of your country, and then to combine it with our new global scenarios. I mentioned that we've done that within the previous process of the post-COVID scenarios together with Bosch. So there are examples on how this could be done. Of course, the next step in a scenario process is very often the consequence analysis. Asking yourself, what would a scenario mean for me? What are the opportunities, the threats, the options? And this could be done in different kinds of workshops, on-site or online, very scientific or more in a gaming format. So there are different ways of how this could be done. It's also a possibility, if you have a strategy, if you have a decision in mind, to make a robustness check or a stress test. So to use the new global scenarios as testing environments and to ask yourself, what would it mean if I would decide this way if scenario 1 or 2 or 3 appears? So this is a relatively easy way to work with the scenarios. And of course, there are also ways of developing strategies based on what we call external scenarios, like the new global scenarios. There are different ways of how this could be done. One way with which we work very often are the so-called strategy scenarios, which are then not describing the site conditions, but our own options. And if you combine that, you get something like a future playing field. So if you are interested in something like that, just let us know. I would like to add 2 points. One point is, if you look in the report, you find a short description of the scenario. But at the moment, what you didn't find is a story from the future. And in this process, we decided not to write every story from Little Paderborn in Little Germany. So the idea is to start a writing contest, and we will do it in a few days, and we will let you know about that, so that every one of you who is interested, or in your organization or somewhere, could take one scenario and ask yourself, how would I describe this scenario in my words, in a little story? And we would like to collect that to get stories from Australia or from Kazakhstan or from Kenya or from wherever, so that we could feel these scenarios more as global ones. And as we have discussed, and as Hannah has described, we would like to continue this process. At the moment, we don't have a fixed idea of, let me call it, the next topic or the next round. We will think about that, and if you have suggestions, if you have ideas, if there are new topics or focal points that come to your mind, just let us know. Yeah, and as I mentioned, you could download the report, you could link it, you could send it to others. If you want to, you could present it. There are additional materials on our homepage. Feel free to use these scenarios. And if you have more questions, we all together, Hannah, Sarah, Jonas, we are happy if you ask us. And I mentioned Gilla from our ScMI office. So if you have even questions regarding the materials, and so you can, maybe you get her first on the phone and she will also be happy to help you. Yeah, Hannah, that's what I wanted to say. Maybe you have a few last words.
Yeah, I'm really happy that so many people stayed, even if we exceeded the time for now 10 minutes, but it shows us that the topic is really interesting and many people all over the world think about our global future. And that gives hope, like Beate just said in the chat. Many people have a clear vision and want a future like described in scenario 3. So if many people all over the world work together and do cooperative work, maybe we can get a step closer to a positive future. So thank you everybody for participating. We from ScMI really appreciate your time and expertise, and we would love to stay in contact. Give us feedback, call, use social media, let us know what you think about the scenarios, and let's stay in touch and discuss our future. Thank you everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Well done. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Alexander Fink, do you stay 1 second, please?
Thanks a lot. Goodbye.